So according to the World Health Organization 2016, 200,000 of homicides occur among persons aged 10 to 29 years of age each year worldwide, and this represents 43% of the total number of homicides globally. Nearly 1/5 of homeless youth in the United States and Canada are victims of human trafficking. And we know, based on the most recent global report on trafficking in persons, sexual exploitation is the most commonly identified form of human trafficking. And that may be because it's the one that is most documented or is most visible when compared to other forms, for example, related to the illegal transplant tourism, which remain a matter of speculation and a large part of the dark figure of crime. These are some of the startling global realities with which small island developing states such as Jamaica must now grapple with in order to end human trafficking in all forms and fulfill the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal 5, which speaks to the achievement of gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls. Goal 8, which amongst other things focuses on productive employment and decent work for all. And Global 16, which speaks to just, peaceful, and inclusive societies for sustainable development. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, online viewers. Welcome to Human Trafficking and the Murder of Youths in Jamaica. This is a public forum, which is an initiative of the Sir Arthur Lewis Institute Crime Prevention and Offender Management Research Cluster, and it seeks to raise public awareness about human trafficking in Jamaica and how it impacts on the well-being of citizens aged 15 to 29 years. It also provides an opportunity for us to recognize the progress made in tackling this issue and to forge meaningful partnerships, in seeking to, in a sense, develop a more proactive response to this issue, developmental issue. You may be asking the question, what exactly are we going to be talking about today? Well, some of the questions in your minds may be, what is the status of human trafficking in Jamaica? Is it connected to the murder of youths? Are girls disproportionately affected? What can be done to improve the existing situations? These are some of the questions that our keynote speakers and the panelists will seek to address or enlighten us on today. We have two keynote speakers and at the moment 2 discussants who are practitioners and experts in their field. But before I introduce the first keynote speaker, please allow me to recognize Professor Aldrin Henry Lee, who is the director of the Sir Arthur Lewis Institute. Put your hands together and welcome her. Okay, so without further ado, I will call on Miss Michelle Salmon, who is the acting Deputy Director of Public Prosecutions and co-chair of Human Trafficking, specifically in the areas of human rights, intellectual property, and sexual offenses unit. We're very grateful to Ms. Salmon, who at very short notice accepted the invitation to speak to us today. She represents Mrs. Carol Palmer, who is the chair of the National Task Force for Trafficking in Persons and who was unable to be here today. So put your hands together and welcome her.
Thank you for that welcome. It is my pleasure to be here. I would like to recognize the persons at the head table, Dr. Herbert Gale, Dr. Dunn, and Ms. Gordon is not here yet. I believe she's the third discussant. I'm very familiar with Ms. Gordon as I've worked with her on several matters in terms of human trafficking out of our DPP's office. Good afternoon, everyone, again, and to the viewers on live. It is very good to be here at the University of the West Indies. It's been some time that I left. I won't date myself, but I remember attending both campuses here, Mona and Cave Hill, when we studied law, and I completed the the practical aspect at the Norman Manley Law School. So it's really good to be back amongst you, and also good to be back in this fantastic building. It's also good to be a part of this particular initiative, which I think is most important, especially at this particular time. Now, having said that, I have 20 minutes in which to speak with you for the first part. Usually when I speak, I'm walking around the place, but I have to remain a bit static now, and I will try my best to try to impart as much as I can from where I am. You know, as a member of the prosecuting office, we're always speaking to several persons, especially in relation to the jurors, right? No, the audience is a little bit different. But I will find it a very interesting and a very important task. When you look on the slide here, you'll notice that there are several images. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this particular image right here. You familiar with this image? Yes. And anyone knows this person? Moody? Moulton? Nicole Moulton. And Nicole Moulton was one of the most recent victims of what? Of murder, right? And is considered one of the statistics, right? Good. You'll also see that I put stop human trafficking. You'll see a help me sign. Help me is written on the palm of the hand, right? And you'll see, if you look closely, you'll see shackles, bondage, yes? You'll also see a girl looking like us when we were growing up, right? And you'll see that she has what on her mouth covering? Money. Great. But you'll also see something promising. You'll see the butterfly in two corners, right? All of that is significant. No. I remember when I was studying philosophy, and I have to be very careful because I'm amongst persons of academia. I remember when I was studying the social contract theories, and I was looking at Hobbes in the Leviathan. And Hobbes wrote about this particular state of nature, remember? And spoke about these very compelling, using these very compelling words about how life would be if there wasn't a government, if there wasn't a political entity, right? And that life would be nasty, brutish, short. Those were some of the words that were used. When I was preparing my presentation, I sought to look on that as well, because I was wondering to my mind if Hobbes was actually speaking about present day, even though we have a government and we have a political society of today, we have a civil society, yet these things are happening presently within our society. It's food for thought. It might sound rather curious that a prosecutor is coming to actually use these things and saying these things as a member of the state. But as a member of the state, I am a minister of justice, and I am also an individual of this particular society, and I have to live in Jamaica with everybody else. And therefore, I am not going to sugarcoat the things, and I'm going to just share a few things in relation to how I view this. When you look on the topic, human trafficking and murder of youth, you might think that there is a correlation, that there is a relationship between the two. But there are really two distinct entities when you look at them. There are two scourges that are within our society. But based on the reports, based on the offenses that we've looked at, we cannot see where, in fact, in terms of trafficking in persons, as it is really supposed to be called, as you would call it, human trafficking, we can't see that there's a relationship with that and the persons who are being killed. Okay? Young people. I don't see any statistics where that is concerned, at least not in Jamaica. You might say to yourselves, what is human trafficking? A lot of persons here know about human trafficking? Yes? No? Yes? Or you think you know about human trafficking? You think you know? Alright. Human trafficking in its basic definition is a trade of humans, most commonly for the purpose of forced labor, sexual slavery, or commercial sexual exploitation for the trafficker or others. Now, there are three main ingredients of human trafficking. There must be the act, there must be the means, and there must be the purpose. Now, what is the act? The act refers to the recruitment, the transportation, the transfer, the harboring, or the receipt of persons. That's the act. Don't forget it. The act, the means, and the purpose. The means. The means speak particular to the use of force or the forms of coercion or abduction, of fraud, deception, or the abuse of power, or a position of vulnerability. Yes? Those are means by which the trafficker would use to get the persons from one particular area, per se, to another particular area. Now, what is the third ingredient? Purpose. It is done for a particular purpose. What are the purposes that we actually see out there? Labor exploitation, sexual exploitation, and one that you really ever think about, and I would like for you to think about: human organs. Yes? Do not blind your eyes to that third one. Much of the cases that we've seen, in fact, the three successful convictions that we've had in Jamaica have related to sexual exploitation and forced labor exploitation. But this aspect of the human organs has not come up yet. But I would want to paint this picture. Can you imagine if your loved one were to be in need of a particular organ? You name it. And there's a particular list, because you can't get the organ just about from anywhere. And what happens? Someone is killed or someone is trafficked in order to get that particular organ. Yes? For your use. You follow what I'm saying? So don't forget, even though there is great emphasis on child trafficking, forced labor, don't forget the organs aspects of it as well. Now, in terms of Jamaica, we have been doing considerable in terms of the kinds of initiatives. We've developed a task force, and it's so good that Dr. Dunn is here, because she has been very instrumental in working with the UN organizations in creating a database as well, in terms of helping the police to document information when it comes on to trafficking, so that they can actually zone these particular traffickers. This task force is actually headed and comes out of the Ministry of Justice, and it's headed by our Permanent Secretary, Mrs. Carol Palmer. And this task force has a number of entities involved. Several ministries, government ministries, Ministry of Labor, the Ministry of National Security. Several, in addition to NGOs are a part of this as well. Yes? And they comprise a particular unit. They have been doing considerable work. They have been advocating government to make legislation, which was put in place in 2007. And since then, there have been several amendments that have taken place. So that before there was a case in terms of penalizing a person who was charged and found guilty for trafficking and giving a light sentence. No, the sentence has expanded to a large amount of years that would be given to a person who has been found guilty. As I indicated, there have been 3 convictions, successful convictions, but there have been other prosecutions in these matters. We worked considerably out of the DPP's office with members of the Jamaica Constabulary Force, and we've actually worked. Come, Miss Gordon. Miss Gordon has been extremely instrumental. In fact, as she walks in, I'll indicate that in terms of one of our first human trafficking convictions, she was the investigating officer in respect of the matter of the Queen and Rajesh Gurnani. And I'll hasten to add, you might think that when you're dealing with trafficking persons that it's only children. It isn't. And you might think it's only females. It isn't. Men are also trafficked. In the case that Ms. Gordon investigated, these were Indian nationals. So you have a situation now where Jamaica is seen as a source country. It's also seen as a destination country. And it's also seen as a transit country. What all of that means. Jamaica, and you might ask yourself, why is it and what is so unique about Jamaica? It is its geographical location. Yes? Its proximity to so many other places. The economic situation, which can be considered a push or a pull factor, depending on how you wish to look on it. Yes? It is also our peoples. Just yesterday I had a discussion and a meeting with the U.S. Marshals who wish for us to articulate here. ICE agents, that they are called Immigration, Customs and Enforcement Agencies. They wish for you to know that they are actually here in Jamaica and that they are working on cases to deal with persons. As in fact, in most recent, there are cases where persons have actually traveled from overseas as tourists and actually have come into the hotels and have molested persons who are 6 years old. Yes, don't be alarmed. Or should I say be alarmed? Yes, because I would like for you today to remember when Hobbes was speaking about that state of, yes, how nasty and brutish and how deprived our society has become. It was before some time, but it continues. Now, I'll give you an example again. A Haitian case that we prosecuted, most recent prosecution, was in respect, and this is about our geography now. No. In that particular case, a person who is a Jamaican, he travels from here in Jamaica and goes to Haiti. He meets upon a young lady who is a little girl. She is in an environment, she grows up in an environment, because I want you to understand the reality of the situation, because don't think at all that it cannot affect you, your neighbor, or somebody close to you. Yes? This young lady, she lives at home with her mother. Her mother has several other children. Mother cannot afford to pay for her to go to school. And it just so happened that this fisherman from Jamaica went to Haiti, saw her, heard her having a conversation with her friend about how it is she's not going to school and so forth. Long and short of it is that he approached her. He then went to her home. Her mother allowed for her to leave from Haiti. She is under the age of 18 years. Because the idea is that she's going to get a better life. Yes? She comes to Jamaica thinking that all will be well, because remember where she's coming from, it's a condition. This is a push factor now, Remember, the poverty, the economic situation, you don't have any proper supervision at home, and here is someone who is presenting himself in a position where you take and you are drawn in. The psychological aspect is taken over. You go. But when she goes in this case, she is kept in a place. She meets his other half, a female who you might think ought to know better.
and who has children as well, takes her in and keeps her and locks her up in a particular place and keeps her there. They move from one location to another. She is beaten. She is forced to have sexual intercourse with the man. And when she speaks out or seeks to speak out, she is shut down, controlled, physical and otherwise. That was the reality of this young lady. That can be the reality of any young girl. So every time you hear a child goes missing, start to think that it is possible that they could be trafficked. Now those are some of the things that are taking place. But we've had a successful prosecution in that particular case. There are other things that are happening in terms of government, in terms of sensitization and going into the schools, the communities. And as you have here this public forum, and the idea is to get you become aware of what this particular scourge is all about. I am hoping that by the time you leave here and you have that discussion with us, that you will feel in a better place with a greater understanding of what human trafficking, or rather, let me phrase it properly in according to our legislation, trafficking in persons is concerned. No. What do we do? Because on the other hand, we have murder of youth. And murder of youth, Miss Moulton, we had a situation with a young lady in St. Thomas who was raped and murdered. I'm not sure if you heard about that. But these are situations that are existing within, next door to us, in other parishes, within the shores of Jamaica. How do we approach it? I mean, many of the persons, when the items were published in the newspaper, made comments. And I'll just read out a few. I remember the children's advocate, Mrs. Gardner-Harris, indicated, quote, absolutely no parent or guardian should have to endure the agonizing pain of having to bury their child under these gruesome and heart-rending circumstances, end of quote. Do you agree? Yes. Do you agree, everyone? Yes. No, I need an audience I need for you to be alive. Yes, and to be awakened and to be aware, because I want to leave you with a thought, and I'm going to be finished in a few. I want you to feel energized. I want you to feel and know that we are at the right place. Yes? Within the University of the West Indies. We are at the right place now, and it is up to us. Mrs. Gardner-Harris goes on to say, she says that across communities across Jamaica should rise up and put an end to child abuse as the silence is costing their lives. Do you agree? Yes. Yes? Do you agree? Yes. Great. She goes on to say, we must as a nation say enough is enough, as we cannot continue to slaughter our children where persons in communities know or even suspect that a child may be abused. We, at the Office of the Children's Advocate, implore them to make a report and speak out, as their silence or turning a blind eye to the problem will only result in heartache. And it pains my heart to say that it is a heartache. And it is brutish the situation that exists within our country. But we have to stop saying government, other offices, other state agencies are to do certain things. It is not just one entity. It is going to take a collective effort. It's going to take all of us as individuals to understand the indicators when it comes down to human trafficking. When you see in your neighborhood someone who looks like they are physically abused, open your eyes. If you're in the hotel industry and you notice certain movements, you say something. If you're in the health industry, You make certain observations of persons who come in to get certain treatment. Yes? If you in your communities observe persons, because look, I don't know of any Jamaican who is not fast. You know what I mean, right? So in other words, you utilize that skill that we have. Just pay closer attention to certain things. Yes? This is how we are together going to make a difference, but we also have to go a step further. We can't just notice a thing and not do anything about it. We have to speak up. We have to open our mouths. We have to raise our voices. We have to encourage the persons who we feel are victims. We have to be our brothers' keepers. And together, I believe we can do this. The last few things I'll say is that the public outcry was, here's a statement from somebody. Lord, my little island in the sun is turning into a war zone. Monsters prey on our children, no stability for the Jamaican dollar. The whole country under turmoil. It's time for our country to wake up. Prayer warriors, pray for our nation. Because only God alone can save us now. The devil is a liar. Yes? Another one, pray not only for your nation, but nations of color. Yes? They mentioned Nigeria, Somalia, including Jamaica and Trinidad. It's the same. Violent crimes against each other. Child rape, murders, drugs, guns, and the insane. It's time for us to look inward and get a solution to this problem or problems. Stop blaming others. And quit asking dumb questions like who bring the guns into our neighborhoods. As if we don't know. Yes? You laugh. It is true. And another. Amen. And there are those who believe that the call of death penalty is moot. Somebody said we should be stringing this one up since a few have gotten away already. Then you hear somebody says, amen to that. We have to go down on our knees for Jamaica. The government is hopeless at sea. Hopelessly at sea when it comes to managing crime. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm coming to my end in terms of my presentation. Perhaps it's not what you would have expected. Perhaps would have gone into a little bit more theoretical stuff. But during the course of the discussion, I'm sure there are questions you'll ask, and I am ready to answer those questions. But I remember something I watched recently when Winston Churchill was speaking just before, when they went in the 1940s, right? And this is around the World War II time period. And he spoke, and he said, never. His last words, anybody know it? Never give up. But he says that, no, never give up. He said, never give in. Never give in. Never, never, never. To those who seek to take our dignity from us, never give in to those who wish to take our youth from us and rob our future. Never, never, never. He didn't say those words, I'm saying these words. Yes? Together we must rise up and make a change. Challenge every organization and entity. Get the communities to speak and be heard. Get the children to speak, but listen to the children at the same time. This is not an act for one. This is an act for all of us. All of us play a part in taking back our country so that it does not remain solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
From Ms. Solomon's presentation, we learned that thus far there has been 3 convictions involving human traffickers. Even so, there is a need for collective action, and we need to be alarmed. Society in a state of war is nasty, solitary, selfish, poor, brutish. A well-known Bayesian theory. Is Jamaica in a state of war? And if so, what can we do to change the situation? I'd like to introduce to the podium our second keynote speaker, who is well known to us. He is Dr. Herbert Gale, who is a sociologist in the Department of Sociology, Psychology, and Social Work here at the University of the West Indies in Jamaica. His anthropological work focuses on social violence. Please welcome him as he comes.
All right, so we're looking at human trafficking and youth murders in Jamaica. And I want us to look at human trafficking in two ways, and it's something that I've found a little bit missing in a lot of the discourse on human trafficking. And that is, there's a visible side and an invisible side. And as an anthropologist, I'm more interested in the invisible side. It's a side where a lot of us do not go, and a lot of us are not even aware. All right, so this is the section that everybody knows about, right? Back Road, Ochores, Henton House in Sav, right? You don't know these things? You don't know about Henton House in Sav? Okay. All right, well, cheers. Good. All right, so some years ago, they used to just have a lot of girls lined up by Henton House in Savon Lamar, the little town in which I was born, strange enough. And people would come and select what they think is the better looking ones for their go-go clubs or whatever, right? Of course, we got rid of that very quickly. But you're aware of the massage parlors and the bars and the nightclubs, and the ones that very few people like to talk about, the pickup boys, all right? A big problem in Jamaica, but they happen to be among the people that we tend to forget. So you're gonna see something when we go to the other section, because one of the things I find intriguing is that on the visible side, when it comes to human trafficking, boys become invisible in the visible area. All right, follow me closely. All right, invisible because of the three frames of violence: the actor, the perpetrator, and the witness. And in anthropology, we will tell you, the ones who are really bad are the witness, usually worse than the perpetrators. Now, let's get to the invisible side. When you get to the invisible side, I'm going to take you through what happens in households in Jamaica when those households are struck with poverty, urban poverty. This is very different from rural poverty, okay? And I want to straighten out something very quickly, because this is also one of the areas that we seem to get very bad. I mean, we're very, very bad at assessing poverty in this region. And I know it may offend persons, but I'm just telling you straight up as it is. I mean, I grew up in a rural community. I have gone back on several occasions just to assess what we've been saying about poverty. And I have asked so many of my colleagues and friends who've grown up in rural poverty, who, when you measure their consumer, yes, when you measure their consumption, it does not look anywhere near an urban person, but yet the urban person feels the poverty loads more. All right? Not just because of social capital and all of these theories, but simply because if you're poor and everybody around you are poor, there is a psychology of poverty that people don't understand. I mean, we go to river, we catch fish, we go up the road and sell them and the fish, come back, jump back in the river. We were enjoying our poverty. Believe me, we had fun being poor. Barefoot and run up and down and kick in the air, you know, and carry on and break a limb jumping off a tree into the river. And who can swim and touch a crocodile as rite of passage, right? When you come to Kingston, who can shoot somebody is rite of passage. A completely different ball game. And I'm always irritated when we have simple things that cut across all context and say that's the one thing that's going to roll. One barrel should roll through everybody's house like a storm. I don't like that kind of theorizing. So, step one. Pressure of the father. We're talking about what happens. And by the way, these 6 steps we've seen in over 100 communities. Okay, just make note, over 100 communities we've seen these exact 6 steps. So after 100 times seeing the same thing, I think you can say it, right? Okay. So step one, if poverty really hits a home, you pressure the father to take on an extra job, or you ask the half man to leave so a full man can come in. It's very, very simple. Okay? And by the way, I want us to treat this with a certain degree of academic maturity, because I want you to understand that I'm speaking to you from the data. All right? In fact, I'll make very few comments of my own. I'll let the data speak for themselves. Step two, the mother does a second job, or she seeks employment if she was unemployed. Third step is the boy stops from school and hustle, and the girl continues in school. Step four, you send one of the children to another relative or foster parent, which is called child shifting, if we want to be kind and euphemistic and academic, but we often treat it as what it is: blindness to slavery. Okay? And it's a girl. Notice, and this is something that I've spent a lot of time with. I remember when Andrew Grant and myself used to work on this a lot. And we would ask people, how do you select which child you want from the house that is suffering? And they would begin to itch. It's always fascinating when people itch when you ask them a question. They itch and they scratch, and sometimes their clothes get really sticky because it's a very horrible question to ask somebody. How do you select whether it's a boy or a girl? Do you know how they select them? If they have needs for field hand, it's a boy. If they need somebody to take care of one of them who is old, it's a girl. Which means the idea is not to help the child. I want you to know this. The idea is to help yourself. Okay. All right. So step 5, mother takes on a second partner, or or enters into what we call in Jamaica part-time sketelism. Okay? And step 6, the mother pimps the daughter, by which time the father is absent. In fact, out of 200 cases we've spent some time focusing on, only one case the father was present, and he was, of course, disabled. So that tells you something, that there's a process. And what annoys me about I promise I wouldn't say too much from here, you know, but what annoys me is that quite often we watch these families going through step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5, step 6, before there's any real discourse within a community to actually rescue this family. All right, so let's look at some figures that I know to be true, because these come from data sets with over, in fact, the data sets these come from would add up to about 8,000 respondents. That's massive. So we know for sure that in Trinidad, 21% of boys are actually on the streets, hustling or doing odd jobs. We know in Belize it is the same, 21%. We know Jamaica always beat up everybody, we always come first. So we know we're 24%. Now there's a problem here. And immediately I want us to examine this very carefully, because again, remember we started out with the visible part, in which there were the boys who were invisible while visible, because of our sociological stance on this matter. I want you to take this very carefully, because try as I may, I've sat with scholars here on the Mona campus, in Belize, at UB, in Guyana, all over the world, wherever the region I land, and I've been asking the questions. How do we get the comparable data for girls? We know we can literally count, because they're so visible, boys on the streets and boys who are working. The problem is we have no corresponding data for girls, because nobody has yet done this massive study that is needed, right, on really and truly, you know, slipping something in like a census or a survey of living conditions or one of these years. And I'm throwing out the challenge out there to find out these little shady areas in households that we can use to calculate how many girls are displaced in these households. But it has not yet been done. I haven't seen it. If it's been done, then somebody can correct me, but I still haven't seen it. I mean, I can pick up data for other countries, for first world countries. I hate to use these words. And I can find these data. But for us, there seems to be no such thing. So the data here are exclusively on boys because we really don't have the data. Well, I don't have the data for girls. One, hustling and working children, and these are some implications. Hustling and working children are indicators of crisis family forms. And I want to remind people that children cannot be poor. Every time I see poor children, I go, methodological error. But children can't be poor. They actually belong to a family, you know. They actually belong to a family, right? 2, boys are visible, but the girls are hidden and more difficult to calculate, I've said before. 3, the boys by nature of their hustle and extensive stay on the streets are extremely vulnerable to all sorts of stuff. For those who don't associate me with Children First, you should. Actually, I'm one of the founders. And one of the fascinating things when we started looking at the kids in Spanish Town and so forth was the extreme vulnerability of boys that you see on the street. I know a lot of you are not aware, but even if you check on their HIV some years after as they enter into the 15 to 34, combatant age is extreme. Like everything for boys on the street are just bad. Like literally, you can't find an indicator that says that, wow, they survived the streets. They seem to be surviving, but they have their drug use is extremely high. Their first sex without a condom is extremely high. I mean, even their experimentation of using a plastic bag as a condom. I mean, every weird thing you can think of is just really high with these kids. All right, number 4, and that's some work from a lot of work there. Sure, boys carry their hustled earnings to their mothers or grandmothers, and many are forced to do so. And this is something that I want us as a country to begin to assess. When we had the MAN program at Children First, we had 21% of our young men not being able to find a word for their mother. Take your time. If the primary nurturer is your mother, and 21% of you in a group, let's say 21% of us here, cannot find a word to describe mother. We give them a card and says, write the first word that comes for your mother. Write the first word that comes for your father. And 1/5 of the young men in the MAN program could not find a word for mother. Because remember, we have this rule in our society that you can't say anything negative against your mother. So they couldn't find a word. In fact, when we tried to push them to say, find a word, the words were not nice. So we were naughty in asking them to find words for their mom. In Belize, we found the exact same thing in areas like Laventil, John, Bangladesh. By the way, Bangladesh means in Trinidad. This is Bangladesh in Trinidad. It means poor set of Indians. That's what it means. Right. We found the exact same thing where the kids could not find a word for their mothers. Why? Because they literally had to hustle. In my Hustling and Juggling, the Art of Survival for the Urban Poor, if you can find a copy of it anywhere, you'll find the exact same thing. In fact, 10 years later, we've gone back to find the 10 boys we worked with, and 3 were killed. 10 years later, 3 of the hustling boys were dead. 10 years later, none of the hustling girls were killed. It tells us a lot about the country. Hustling boys are the most likely to be aggressive and to join gangs. The probability of a boy in the street joining a gang is literally 1 out of 3. Let me make sure you get that. Take any community. Did you know only 5% of inner city youth actually get involved in murders and violence and these things? 5%. When you go on the street, 33%. Can you handle that? You understand what I'm saying to you? Yet they're just allowed to roam the streets like goats. 1 of 3. Inner city, 1 of 5% is 1 of 20. So inner city, 1 of 20. Street, 1 of 3. But 1 of 3 is allowed to just stay there and fester, right? We have a problem. All right, so let's look at this one. It says hunger is the most critical push factor Hustling boys are the most likely to engage in adult life prematurely. We call it adultification, including engaging in sexual intercourse. Hunger is the number one factor that pushed them on the street. The second factor is poor relationship with mother or mother absence. I know we grow up on the data that says father absence. Believe me, that's only in our dreams when we go to bed after having too much food. That is not, I have not yet, I have not yet found a group of killers who don't have a problem with their mothers. And when I make these statements and I say to people that we have to begin to invest more money in the relationship between mothers, we have to empower more mothers. We have to take mothers at risk and really pump resources. And listen, I'm not a father's aid. It would be nice if nature had said pump some money to fathers and so forth. But I'm humble with this. I don't have a problem. Sure, there's a role for fathers, but I can assure you, as soon as somebody goes on a rampage and kills, and I get a chance to sit down with him, he tells you a long story about his mother. And we're not getting this. Every time you say it, somebody thinks, oh my God, I take it personal. Don't do that today, please. Finally, hustling boys and enslaved girls have low life chances. This is the point I was making. If in 10 years I go back and visit 10 young men, 10 kids who were hustling, and 3 were dead, including one who, listen to this, who was killed while hustling to send his sister to one of the top 5 schools in Jamaica. Tells us a lot about what happens to these kids. In fact, when I spoke with his mom, the mom was now all riled up in the conscience, and I said to her, where is, I almost call the boy's name, where is this boy? And she says, ask his sister, is she, he was out hustling fishing, ask her. And I'm like, why should I ask her though? Because you are the one who sent him. But when we are in pain, you find somebody for to escape on. Let's look at our state very quickly. We should be able to finish this very quickly. We're the 4th most violent country in the world. And by violent, 4th most violent in the world, in the anthropology of violence, we take 15 and 30 year blocks. We don't say, you know, you're the most violent country in the world because you're the most violent this year. So countries like St. Kitts and US Virgin Islands and these islands that have had murders above 30 per 100,000 are not really to be drawn into this because they have a spike and then they fix a little business level. We are consistent in our murders. Okay? Good. So don't mix other people with us. When we are doing our thing, we do long term. Good. So for the last 16 years, this is what we look like. Our homicide rate has been 48.2 as average for the last 16 years. So I'm going to answer the question, where are these murders taking place? And what I'm giving you here are homicide rates calculated. Please note the accuracy of these figures. These are calculated with the yearly shifts in population as extrapolated. Is that clear? So we didn't take a block of 2011 and so somebody's there, right? Like, you know, the joke is there, the homicide rate is 50 and people shift out the population today. So it's 49.2, you know. Don't feel too bad. 49 and 50 don't give you the same feeling. The homicide rate is there is 50.1. So if you look carefully, you'll see that Kingston, and by Kingston we mean the only place in the Caribbean where the population gets less every census because nobody wants to live there. It's called Kingston. I know for sure we do 2 things with Kingston. We have a massaging of Kingston. We call entire KMR, which is made up of 1.1 million Kingston, right? Which includes Portmore and everybody, right? But we're talking here about the 90,000 people who live below Carib 5. That place that you go and don't step below, that one. Good. Then we have St. James, which has a homicide rate of 101. Then we have 2 hubs in Jamaica. We have the KMR hub, which which is basically including Spanish Town, and then Spanish Town, of course, had a baby called Clarendon, and then Clarendon is now pregnant with Manchester. You know what's going on, right? Okay, good. Now, then the second hub is Montego Bay, St. James, right? And I don't want to get into the politics. You know, sometimes people need to stay in ignorance. We'll leave St. James a little bit. But St. James then had a baby called Westmoreland, and Westmoreland had a baby called Hanover, and St. James now is pregnant with Trelawney. Good. So if you understand all of these things, it will make sense to you. Now look at these figures very quickly. I want you to look at these. I'm not certain if you can see what's there, but you have 3 donuts there. The top one gives you the average for the world. The red you see there is the proportion of persons in the world who are murdered. 82% of victims of murder in the world are men, and 18%, the one you can't see, that's women. All right? Now, if you shift from the average of the world to the north, countries that are very peaceful have something that is extremely pressuring and really nasty and brutish, let me borrow Hobbes' words. And that you'll see that over a quarter of victims of murders are women in first world countries. Okay, now we're going to shift to the war zone, the LAC. The LAC, by the way, has 9.7% of the world's population, but literally 40% of its murders. So it's a war zone. In a war zone situation, you're looking for an indicator. Anywhere you see women account for less than 10% of murders, you are in a war zone. Okay? Now you may see the 10% and go, whoa, women are only making up 10%. No, that's bad. Why is it bad? Because that 10% in real numbers flood that 27%. Making sense? So it's a small proportion when compared to men in real terms, in actual numbers. And actual numbers mean actual headaches and actual funerals and so forth. That's massive. That 10% is literally in the LAC, literally close to 40% of the world's women who are dying. Okay? All right, so let's quickly go through this. And what you'll see here is when it comes to the red this time, right? So this time it was typed in Excel correctly, so it will give it the correct colors. That makes some sense to you, right? So the red is female, the blue is male. All right, okay. You're accustomed to those color associations. All right, now the first thing you'll see is that the first group, oh, by the way, these groups actually, these age actually have meanings. 0 to 14 is what we call in violence studies we call that pre-youth. All right, and you sometimes see B to 14 means birth, because we don't like to use the number 0 to describe people. All right, and then you see 15 to 34, which is the combatant age. That is the age at which you have the most androgen in your body, the most testosterone and so on. That's when you're most aggressive, right? A lot of persons who used to make up a lot of noise, by the time they get to 35, you can play with them. They become a little bit more teddy bears. Even the mothers who used to harass you, when they become grandma, they spoil the children, don't? Because the testosterone is gone. All right? Yeah. Yes. You've never noticed? They used to walk and know you have them your child. Why are you touching the child? For them no verbal movements, right? Okay. And then we get to the age 35 to 69. And 35 to 69 is very critical in violence studies, because that is the most active age. That's the age in which you pile on monies, middle age, so early middle age, mid-middle age, late middle age, all of that. And 70 plus is when you really fall into, in war zones, you fall into a trigger zone. People actually hunt people of those age, of the 2 age on the outside, birth to 14 and 70 plus to kill, to trigger wars. Because these are persons who are not involved in war at all. All right, so let me take you quickly to look at that. Now, this diagram is a little bit troublesome, because what it is showing you is that over on this side you're looking at males, right? Over on the other side you're looking at females. And that's really the line graph that shows the comparison between male deaths, as in murders in Jamaica, and female deaths in Jamaica. We'll leave it. It will stay with you in your heads. That's enough. If you take the average for the world, so the average murder rate for the world is 9 per 100,000. Ours is 50. Okay? Don't get depressed. All right, so Jamaica is 50, the world is 9, and you see that the line for males and the line for females. And what you see, what you'll notice is just a curve for males and females, right? I'm going to do it another way so it stays in your mind. Okay? If you take that, you begin to really grit your teeth and really begin to understand my pain as a person who's trying to help our country solve its murders, to reduce its murders. What's the first thing you begin to see is that I've taken out a group called male combatants, 50 to 34 years. And I've actually grabbed a team of people around me and taken all the data and take days and days and days to produce you this one chart. What you're getting from it is that, look at that line. There's a purple line which gives you the US-led invasion of Iraq homicide rate, which is 205.1. Okay? Now what we've done is we've cut that line right there, and to see where in Jamaica there are men of the combatant age, which would be war age, right?
Yeah.
Good. That would be about it. If you take Kingston, so that purple line is 205. If you take Kingston, the blue means all males, not combatant, just all males. All males living in Kingston, on average, are in a state worse than Iraq at full-scale wars. Okay? Then when you take the combatant group, that means only males who are most likely to be recruited for war, they go to 414 per 100,000, which is 2.19 that of Iraq, right? Then you go to St. James, you get the same picture, right? And then when you go to the other end, you find only one place in the entire country where males are safe, Portland. All right, so let's look at these very quickly, right? Let's look at these very quickly. And this is the extremely sad part that people are not getting in their heads. And sometimes I try to impart to people, but they get so clouded with insular thoughts that they miss the point. Follow me closely. B to 14 means birth to 14. So you can exchange it with a 0 if you wish. Okay? We're looking here at the murders of women. Okay? And we're looking here at a number of years, including the years when women died in clusters, which caused all the eruptions, right? Remember? If you die quietly, 1, 1, 2, 2, it doesn't put people in panic. But if you dare die in 5s and 6, right? Okay? That's what the world was. So, what you'll find is that the combatant age, we're going to switch that word now because we're talking about women, so we're now talking about the peak reproductive years, right? See? Not combatant anymore, but the peak reproductive years, which is 15 to 34. All right? You can have a big discussion about it afterwards, but let's go. You'll see that 44% of any woman who dies in this country between 2011 and 2015 would come from that very active age, right? And we're going to come back to that. You also see, so that's youth, right? Youth is 15 to 24, and extended youth is 25 to 34, right? After that, your alpha cells and androgen and all these things begin to die. Good. Now, the next group that comes right afterwards is 35 to 69. But the bulk of those people would have died by 42. Is that clear? We good? All right. But notice the group, the two layer groups, right? Which is 70 plus and birth to 14, which are, again, the two groups that usually don't get involved in people's wars, right? Or killed. They made up what proportion? Can you calculate that for me? 8%. Come on, we're not so bad, man. Come on. Huh? 14%. So 14% of people are being killed because there are triggers. So we live in a country where 14% of women are dying just based on triggers. As in, you have a war, I have a war, you kill one, I kill one, I kill two, you kill two, it gets boring. I go and I kill women, and children, and elderly, and disabled, and that gets you vulnerable. You come and forget that you even have your weapon or strategy, and I get to slaughter your team. That's what we call triggering. So triggering is of course a war strategy. Let's look at males quickly. Do you see a different picture? Same pattern with a different configuration. Do you understand those two anthropology terms? They may look similar, but look for the difference, right? We no longer have 14%, we have 2%, right? Because a boy birth to 14 is really not worth triggering. Why would you not use a boy to trigger? Because not many of us are going to cry. Stay with me. Stay with me. Triggering means taking that which is most sentient. That is the reason why, look at that, 1% old men. But old women get slaughtered. You get what I'm saying? So there's a lot of things you have to look at very carefully. Reasons young women die. So now we're going to take the big group, 15 to 34, which is what? Not the combatant age, because they're not men. They're the core reproductive group. Good. Look at what happens. What's the number one reason women die? And by the way, I took a year of this group, and I went to every single community, everything to find out from people. Most trial later, I can't even tell you what we did to find out people's ideas of what happened. There's a dramaturgy surrounding murders. And I'm not speaking about murders here just in an abstract, because believe me, every murder I have to investigate for the purpose of social science hurts me. But it's fascinating when you listen to people. You hear one thing on the news, and you speak to the family, and they give you another thing. And then you go down the road, and they tell you the same thing the family said. Then you go to the other side, they tell you the same thing the family said. The only person who got it wrong was the news. That's what we have. Triangulated material, but that does not match the news. So let's go. The number one reason women of the reproductive years die, what percentage can you see it? The biggest one is 32% to trigger a war. To trigger a war. In other words, when gangs want a full 100 full-scale war, they go at the most vulnerable, but not just the most vulnerable, they select the most vulnerable that also carries the highest point of sentience, the most emotion, to trigger the other side at war. Okay. Second group, GED. As in, her partner killed her. You know the percentage? That's not what we hear. Okay, let's go on. Then we go to the other group, gang war strategy. Literally, half of the top gangs I work with, let me name some of them for you. MS-13, 22nd Street, Crips, Bloods, name them. The core strategist in these gangs is a woman. Take your time. Even when I head further east, see all of these myths we have about violence. Even when I head further east, and I sit down and speak to people who are planning to travel, to head north, I don't always a male. Because we already have this idea of what males do. So the people who are working behind the scenes work with our assumptions. Female contract. Now, I have, just last week, I've now got to my 220th repeat killer. I have now interviewed 220 persons across 9 countries who have killed more than 2 persons. So let me tell you from the data, not from anywhere else but the data. Female contract means that women employ men to shoot native. Okay? Hold on, stay with me. Stay with me. Remember, we are looking at one age group, right? We're looking at the most active age group. We're not looking at the outlier groups. We're looking at the 15 to 34. So do not generalize and say this happens to all women. This applies to one group. Remember? Good. Just make sure you have that straight. What percentage is female? Look at that. 11%. Basically, in fact, you know what was painful in going through this data, I won't tell you the year because I know Jamaica is small, is the fact that when we there was something about this 11%. When you saw pictures of them, let me use a Jamaican word, hot. When we get the chance to hear people speak about who killed them, you can see the competition. Brutish competition that ends in violence. And of course, informer is just a little bit higher. In other words, when we take all of these, I want you to add up how many persons here from this group die because of gang warfare, right? Okay? And I want you to get it in your head that there is not going to be any reduction in our violence in this country, in our attempt to assist our young people until we begin to stop this process of separation. That there's a story about our women compared to our story about our men. The data here shows, let's add it up. Let's take the 25% that is hardcore domestic violence, add it to the 11%, right? That has to do with Métis War. Okay? Let's just use the street name. And tell me what you get. Tell me what you get as the residual category. 60? Come on, your math can't be that bad. Come on, 64%. In other words, close to 2/3 of the women we see who are dying, yes, die because we have this constant war going on. Let me shift you from Jamaica and take you to some data in Belize. Do you know what we've discovered? Once the murders in Belize go up, the number of women who die go up. We've tracked this for 21 years, and there's been no exception. Why? Because the death of women, the murders of women, are connected with men murdering men. Yes? So some humble suggestions, yes? The most effective tool to reduce homicides and the abuse of youth in Jamaica remains constructing an efficient central political authority. Irrespective of what we do and say and however we want to jump up and have bacchanal, my Trini friend used to say, about this whole thing, we are going to have to hold government accountable to some point. Yes? And when I say the central political authority, we're talking about the legislature, right? We're talking about the judiciary. We're talking about the security, and we're talking about, at the base, civil society. Do you know what's been happening in Jamaica? We've been turning to civil society to carry serious loads when the top is not functioning. And I want you to spend any time on that, because once you speak about the top in Jamaica, it becomes political. Somebody said to me, Jamaica is a nice place to be in politics, because if you're a laborator and say something, you have labor to back you, whether you're wrong or right. And if you're a comrade and say something, you have comrade to back you, whether you're wrong or right, because we are laborers and comrades before we're wrong or right. So let's go. The second issue after we begin to develop this maturity to hold government accountable is that we have to begin to address family. We have no way around this. And a lot of us are going to have to jump up with me and begin to say that this so-called assessed 5% of families we have in Jamaica
that are made up of mothers who are completely unsupported has to be addressed. 42% of our families in Jamaica are couple families. We know that. 32% are extended, right? About 20% are sole, listen carefully, because this one carries a lot of expletives all over the country. Sole parent household. Meaning, when we come to your house, we should see you alone and the child or children. When we ask you to fill out the form that says your household, you shouldn't say you have grandma, grandpa, whatever, and then say you're a single mother. You're an extended household. You're just having a single mother feeling today. Try and see if we can understand that. So if you're a sole parent household, you make up about 20% of the country. Are we clear on this? Not me say so. Survey of living, everything says that. It's the same data. Right, good. Now, when we take the sole parent households, every community we've gone in to look at the sole parent households, we found a quarter of these households to be in trouble. A quarter of 20 is 5. Therefore, I take it for granted that with such simple math, I can make the assumption that 5% of our households in Jamaica are in dire straits. And I've gone to the point now where I'm negotiating internationally all on my own for us to begin to address these families. Can I tell a little secret? 53% of our repeat killers come from this 5% of households. So it means that if we would intelligently funnel our funding towards addressing these mothers who are crying out, I am amazed at how people can walk around with a perception that rules their head so much that they miss the point that I've been making. I've been saying, and it's hilarious because we've assessed this in Belize, it's 4.2%. We've done this in Trinidad, it's 4.1%. And we've said to people directly, run and catch these families, because how do you know these families? It's easy. They have no support system. Boys are tortured like crazy in these families because there's no other way to have a boy who's bigger than you. Huh? Right? Let's take a small, let me show you now, right? You have a boy who walks around the place, right? Who the dancer send him come. Let me tell you the most creative things I've seen. You give him a poison. I won't tell you what the cocktail is, but it works. When the Don comes for him tomorrow, he can barely move. The Don says, what kind of dead's in this? You have just saved your boy's life, but you've also destroyed his life. Are you understand what I'm saying to you? So I have never ever sat down with these women without complete empathy and understanding why they go to such extents to take hot iron and burn the boy, tie him to a tree and run the chicken back fat straight to the tree so the ants can bite him up. I've seen tortures in this country, in Belize, in Trinidad. I've seen tortures in this region that you could never understand. But as I sit with these mothers, I understand what they're trying to do. Because that's all the resource they have left. The intriguing thing is that 78% of all of these mothers I've worked with, and we're expanding the data frame right now, have been tortured and terrorized and trafficked as children. So it's part of the resource that they have to use to fight a Don who can say, you dead and you're dead. Do you understand that? I think we're going to have to get to a point where we ban all forms of torture in this country, and I don't care. I did a presentation recently and a man said to me, do you know why I have achieved so much? Let me show you the scars. My father sat on me and my mother burned me up. And I got it in my head. They shocked it into me that I should make something of myself. And I sat there and I listened. And I said, I jumped up with the same drama. Do you know what you could have become if they never tortured you? Remember that victims rationalize the necessity for their victimization. Can we get that in our heads? Yeah? Yep. We rationalize. A lot of kids I've worked with who've been trafficked all over the place. There's a girl I was working with. She's gone from Bahamas to Trinidad, 15 years old. Belize, El Salvador, you'd never believe it. She has 3 birth certificates. She's been working the whole frame. Until I saw her in Belize and I said, sweetheart, guess what? I'm trained to read your neck, I know your age. If you don't have 2 rings right under your ears, you cannot be 20. You have 1 ring and half of a ring, you're 15 or 16. What's up? And the tears started flowing. And I called my friends in Belize and I said to them, let's get this girl home. You see, there are complexities that we have to begin to work out. But if we have family settings that make sense, kids will know that there's somebody who cares. Yeah? And if we don't have families, at least we have communities. Am I right? Yeah. And these communities are to act. Here's my one word outside of the statistics and, in fact, from the belly. I'm amazed at what goes on in this country in the name of simply being community. I've watched 6 different churches set up something for the poor and the church members take it over. And they declared that those services were too good for the people. Take your time. This is not the data now. This is for you. When did we get there? Take your time. Let me repeat what they did. Let me give you an idea. In one case, the church built a nice little school, but the teachers they brought in were really high-tech teachers and really into it. And the school, am I talking too much now, Lord? And the school got 100% passes. The church members said, mad. Second term, the church couldn't stop them. Now, they have 3 persons in the entire school who are poor. I think we should begin with an attitude to share and to love and to reach out to people. Nothing can be too good for people who are poor, who need help. Take care of yourself. God bless.
Quite an interesting and intriguing presentation. I hope you weren't intimidated by the figures. But put your hands together again for Dr. Herbert Gale, head of Fathers Inc. From Dr. Gale's presentation, we learned a number of things. He was able to shed light on the invisibility and visibility dimensions of human trafficking, which is a form of organized crime. Before you go, Dr. Gale, we have a gift for you, and I don't know if you would take 2 questions before you go. 2 questions, just 2.
Thank you, Dr. Gale. Are the Ministries of National Security and Ministries of Culture and Gender and Youth talking to and listening to you?
Yeah. Just in light of sort of the rehabilitation of offenders, because it's one thing prosecuting, but Jamaica's got to sort of recover from not just sort of it's a 400 years of kind of ill treatment that people are having to recover from. So I know that there has been some moves from the British government to fund penal institutions in the Caribbean. Is there any attempt to ensure that those institutions are actually reformed so they don't just end up in jail, and also the jails don't end up just as a private entity funding pensions and stuff like that, that they actually become places of reform? Does that make sense?
Boy, somebody is leaving, and you ask me 2 of the toughest questions I've heard for a very long time. And then you people also know that I have an honest streak. You can stone me after I'm gone. Number 1, we don't really have prisons. Modern prisons actually have rehabilitation. Okay? I have been to, 119 prisons across the world. I've actually slept in prisons.
No, I wasn't charged. I was allowed to stay in prison overnight while I interview repeat killers. Okay? And I can tell you, I have never seen anything like what we have here. Okay? And I've been to prisons in less developed countries. Okay? We have holding cells where, let me not even go into it. The point is that Europe has a clause. I know I'm going to be stoned in what I'm going to tell you. Europe has a clause that says, I can't really send you to a place that will be considered to be inhumane. That is the reason why, in order to, I think you're filling in the blanks, certain persons need to build prisons, because what we've been having is tons and tons of deportation, and then these persons end up in worse situations here. But if I were to commit a crime in England, they couldn't really send me to Jamaica, because all I would need is a lawyer to say, you take me out of a prison where I was getting rehabilitation, learning to read, had a laptop, a bed, and you send me to... The lawyer doesn't even need to be good. That's the problem. Who are the persons talking to me?
Okay, so it was the first one question.
Yes.
In relation to the Ministry of National Security. Listening to
Yes,
and culture.
I don't know who are listening. I just know that since I've returned to this country, I have been doing a lot of talking. In some cases I talk too much. But I am beginning to hear people making little rumblings that they are listening. And I think that's a start. It's not discouraging. Let me tell you why it is not discouraging. First of all, we are wired, having gone through centuries of oppression, we now go through self-oppression. Does this make sense to you? And by the way, I've seen this among the Inuits in Canada. I've seen this everywhere. I've seen this among the Welsh people in England. I've seen it anywhere. Anywhere you oppress people for very long, they learn how to oppress themselves. Okay? If you look at me, I look very Jamaican. There's nothing about me that says you can trust in being a little bit foreignish. Even the accent I came back home with is gone. All right? Yeah, I do pronounce English words very English, but separate from that, I am very Jamaican. That's hard to work with. In fact, there's a group of people trying to get me to come to their university, and one of the things they've written to me is that people respect you more from this point. Okay? So the fact that people are listening and saying little rumblings now, I give Jah thanks.
Okay, thank you so much. So I'll quickly introduce our three discussants. First up, we have Dr. Lee Dunn. She's a Jamaican sociologist and a graduate of the University of the West Indies and the London School of Economics and Political Science. Since 2006, she has served as a senior lecturer and head of the UAE's Institute for Gender and Development Studies, leading a program of teaching, research, and outreach to identify and address gender and development problems and inequalities. The interesting thing to note about Dr. Dunn is that the most recent study on human trafficking in Jamaica was recently completed in March 2016, and it was led by IGDS, which Dr. Dunn heads, and I think the report contributed to improve ranking in relation to the U.S. State Department's World Tier. Yes, definitely, in human trafficking of persons. So she'll be able to tell you a little bit about that. Following her, we have Dr. Althea Niblett. Can you just indicate? Dr. Althea Niblett is Bayesian, and she's a medical doctor who obtained her Bachelor of Medicine Bachelor of Surgery, MBBS medical degree at UWI here at Mona and Kville campus in 2008. She's the first recipient of the G. Raymond Chang Forensic Pathology Fellowship and the first Caribbean medically trained forensic pathologist, subspecialist affiliate of the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons of Canada. She is currently a consultant forensic pathologist at the Institute of Forensic Science and Legal Medicine under the Ministry of National Security. And then following her, we'll hear from Detective Sergeant Kemisha Gordon, who is attached to the Counterterrorism and Organized Crime Investigations Branch, Trafficking in Persons and Intellectual Property, Vice Squad, a Vice S Squad. She has over 16 years of service in this branch. So put your hands together for Dr. Dunn.
I want to first of all congratulate SALISES, my other home and partners, because I consistently admire the work you do and support the Caribbean Child Research Conferences, and I had the benefit of being a fellow for a short period with SALISES. That was much appreciated. I come to this question of human trafficking and responding to what has been said by sharing my own experience. I came into this whole process having done research for the International Labour Organization on child labor, and particularly the worst forms of child labor, and had an opportunity to contribute to the development of rapid assessment methodologies for doing research in this area and hard to reach groups. But also looking within that at child trafficking as one of the unconditional worst forms of child labor. I did a study in 2001 on children in prostitution in Jamaica, and did 3 others in Bahamas, Barbados, Tobago, yes, 4 of them in Jamaica. And that highlighted the vulnerability of Caribbean countries to these forms of child labor, but particularly human trafficking. Unfortunately, the US State Department used that study to put us on a watch list. It was the time that they were preparing this watch list. So whenever June comes around, my heart sinks, because that's when they're going to announce what tier we're on. Jamaica has been very vulnerable in this area because we are seen as, or my colleague said, as a source, transit, and destination country for human trafficking. And trafficking, she mentioned a number of the areas. The gender dimensions of commercial sexual exploitation, for example, is estimated 85% female, women and girls, and the balance being boys. For forced labor, it is the reverse, with more males being at risk. And that can take various forms, including looking at children working in agriculture, mining, in other areas as well. The issue of harvesting, she mentioned, which is a very critical thing, and I need us to look at that in the context of dialysis or non-communicable diseases, pushing, meaning that a lot of people are going to be needing kidneys. And the trends that we have seen globally is that people have, their kidneys are harvested to enable you to continue living. And there are cases of people being exploited, trafficked and exploited. Their kidneys are removed, or they thought they were selling 1 kidney and 2 are taken, or they're beaten up afterwards and they die, okay? So there's a whole sordid underworld of this human crime and global crime called trafficking in persons. But I want us to look at child marriages. We think that this doesn't happen here, but when we think of children being groomed and they're transferred, and we heard some of that earlier, we need to re-look at what we define as child trafficking. The research we have also, there are other areas of research that we have done which focus and highlight other forms of trafficking. We have done studies, for example, on household workers in Jamaica as part of the attempts to have us ratify Convention 189, Decent Work for Domestic Workers, which was done last September. And we discovered in doing that research that we have had child domestic workers, children who have been trafficked as children, moving from a rural to an urban area, and colleagues hinted at that, and Dr. Gale mentioned some of that. although not calling it in terms of that, using that terminology. Another angle we know is the risk of climate change. So we have just gone through a very traumatic period where we're seeing our Eastern Caribbean wiped out. We see our colleagues in other countries, other parts of the world being devastated. Why is there a link between climate change disasters and human trafficking? Essentially what happens is that the family system breaks down. People are more vulnerable, and we have seen an increase in trafficking in countries including in Haiti after the earthquake. So people are vulnerable, people offer to come and help, but of course they can also be exploiting others as well. We are migrant workers, right? We are coming out of a period of an enslavement historically, but we have other opportunities for migration, and I caution and ask us with the Caribbean single market and economy that with the free movement of labor, there's also the risk of human trafficking. So we work with household workers who are entitled, and we work with our students and what have you to say that if the opportunity looks too good, it is likely to be not good, right? You can be trafficked, so we have to be careful about that. What are some of the causes? Dr. Gale gave you a very stirring presentation on some of those factors. We look at the gender dimensions of it around poverty, and know that single female-headed households, because they have larger numbers of persons and women as a group tend to earn less, those households are vulnerable and therefore predisposed to child labor and so on, and human trafficking. But I speak about violence in the home as well, because some of the research I've done directly points to violence in the home as a push factor for both boys and girls, and that makes them vulnerable. Someone comes along, offers them something as an alternative, and they get caught. I talk also about domestic violence as a push factor, specific push factor. Now, there's a lot of work that still needs to be done in terms of how we define it in law, how we collect the data, how we analyze the data, and so on, but domestic violence has also emerged. Our system of patriarchy, the system of patriarchy in various forms contributes to the scourge we're talking about and the crime that we're speaking about. So our research in 2007, the first study that I did with Sybil Ricketts, Sybil Ricketts, yes, looked at the situation. It was the first situation analysis we had of human trafficking, and that study was used to inform policies, programs in the JCF, and so on. More recently, in 2015, 2016, I was asked to do follow-up research to update on what are the critical issues emerging, what has changed, looking globally at what has happened. And among the new areas of the new groups at risk, we found masseuses, people working in massage parlors, because previously we had focused on commercial sex workers. Them having been sensitized and are less at risk in the sense of knowledge and being more aware, we found that people working these massage parlors were at risk. Another group we found are men who have sex with men. High risk of human trafficking because the activities, the sexual activities, the sexual exploitation, the coercion happens, but they are not allowed to talk about it, right? So that emerges another group. When we look at the definition of human trafficking, the activity, the means, and the purpose, the exploitation is there, but that emerges a particularly vulnerable group. Cybercrimes. We give our children laptops, we give them tablets and what have you, but we do not teach them how to use that equipment safely. Children are techno-natives. They know exactly how to turn on a computer and use it from very early. Older persons are techno-migrants, right? We have to be taught. So the children will wrap us up. So even if you try and put on a safety guard, It means that we need to be doing a lot more in terms of working with parents, with schools and teachers around cybersecurity. And that is a critical area because that can also reduce the risk of human trafficking. The dark web is there. People go on, they go to chat rooms, they tell about themselves, they put profiles themselves, and there's a gender differential in terms of what males and females, particularly adolescents, put on themselves, about themselves there. So we found several other factors that said that we need to perhaps look again. We also reviewed legislation across the Commonwealth to see what were the best practices to ensure that we're aligned with the Palermo Protocol, which is the Trafficking International Convention on Trafficking. Now, a law was developed in 2007, the TIP law, Trafficking in Persons law, that was updated in 2013, and I know that the task force is looking to see how it can further improve the legislative framework to ensure that we have some improvements. So the task force looks at 4 main areas. It looks at prevention, and part of the prevention is what we are doing now, building awareness. They've done billboards, they have done thing on buses. You will see things like these flyers, little leaflets you can put in. They've also done a curriculum. Another of these, you'll see these kind of flyers. And those are projects which have been done to build awareness and prevent trafficking. But they've also done training with judges, police, several other groups. They also have done training with border security personnel, your immigration officers. How do I spot someone who is likely to be trafficked? How do I deal with that? So there are protocols and education which is being done. The other area is prosecution, and my colleagues spoke about that. Although there have been only 3 convictions, there are a lot more in the pipeline. And part of the challenge is providing the evidence. If the police do not have evidence, they cannot move forward. Victims are already who have been trafficked are traumatized, so it means it takes a special effort and additional support to enable them to come forward and go through a trial again, right? And then we have a culture of silence. People don't want to talk about certain things, and that undermines the ability to have those convictions. The prosecution then is one thing, but third is protection. And there is a shelter, at least one shelter, for persons who have been trafficked, and the attempts are there to improve those, but also partnership. So it's prevention, protection, prosecution, protection, and partnerships. And those partnerships have expanded. I'm encouraging everyone who is here, who is listening, to ensure that you find out more about human trafficking and become part of the solution. So we worked with the International Organization for Migration as well, adapted a database that they had, and in a very participatory way, developed this database for the National Task Force. We also developed a protocol for information sharing, a brochure that could be used to encourage people to buy in, but also a communication strategy to support their advocacy and communications program, and as well the legislative review that I mentioned. One of the other things is that the National Task Force has actually developed a curriculum for schools from 9 till 11. And last week, the advocate for trafficking, Mrs. Gordon Harris, actually, Harrison? Yes, she's a rapporteur. She actually invited me to a meeting that she was having with educators, principals, or what have you, to talk about the integration of the curriculum in the trafficking in persons curriculum in schools and how that could be enhanced. Just to mention also that there are several apps. There is a documentary which has been done. People like Brian Walker have done another documentary which has been aired on CVM TV. There are a lot of faith-based organizations that have been doing education work on human trafficking. And also to say that the work continues. We're currently on a Tier 2 watch list, which is an improvement, because if we were to get another tier 2 watch list, we would have been down to a tier 3, and that means all non-humanitarian aid would have been suspended for the country. So the U.S. has, the U.S. State Department has done a lot of work and treats it very seriously. Policing the world, of course, human trafficking is also a major problem in the U.S., right? And we know about that. But I'm encouraged to see the work that is being done, and I encourage students are here to do more work on it, research, publish, and I just want to pause because I know there are others who are here. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for inviting me. So I'm Althea Neblin from Barbados, but I've worked here most of my adult life, lived in Jamaica for a long time. I'm an anatomical pathologist, which means I diagnose diseases, but I subspecialize in forensic pathology, which is to determine why somebody is dead, the cause, and the manner. So when Dr. Leslie invited me, I was kind of resisting her because I couldn't figure out what role would I really play in human trafficking. And I was sitting down here trying to figure out how many cases have I done that might have been linked to child abuse. Straight out child abuse, over the last 7 years, 3. That doesn't mean that it's not there. That just means we miss it, right? I like your statement when you say that the human trafficking and the murders of youth are 2 separate things. They're 2 different entities. But in a way now with Dr. Gill's presentation, it's kind of linked, right? Because we don't put the social aspect into a lot of things. So in my job, I interact with the police. They give me all the information, or very little. And it gets very irritating. And thinking about it, it could be either a protective mechanism, because sometimes you just don't want to know what really happened. It can be very overwhelming. Or they just don't know that we need to know more information. As everyone be saying, most of the youth that die mainly from gunshot wounds are young people, and they're very extreme. So it could be as young as 11. I did one, yesterday, 11-year-old. But that was from being careless, somebody playing with a gun and the person was shot, right? But then there are people who are liming on the block, and somebody comes to kill 1 person, but they kill 3, right? And that's becoming the norm, where I always ask, who was the intended victim, you know? Because it's 1 person who is clearly shot up, and then there's 1 or 2 in this person who just ran across the road, and I find sometimes the constable, they get very callous. Again, maybe they're just a protective mechanism. And I believe education is the only way out for everything, you know? So everybody hands are in the air, what are we gonna do with the crime? What are we gonna do with this? Go back to the source. So Dr. Gill said you need to get back to the family. I think that's the only way you can stop this. So like I have personal experience, not somebody being killed. But when I was living in a certain area, my place was broken into, right? I'm broken into a 2nd time. And my neighbor in talking was saying, oh, you know, the person that broke into your place, this person spoke to him and asked him to bring back X, Y, and Z. I'm like, they didn't call the police? No. And his brother is in jail for this and that. And his mother knows this because he brings in the money. So they're fine with it. So I know you said one of the what's the word you use? The purpose, the means. You know, you get coerced to doing something, or because you have to hustle and you can't make ends meet. That's why people do what they do. Or some people are just callous. They know it's wrong, and they just do it nonetheless because they're comfortable, right? So that's a big problem which people have to fight to change things. And as Dr. Gill said, people do not talk. I can tell you, I was in Spanish Town Plaza on Monday, and I saw 2 policemen taking out their guns, going after somebody, and what's happening? People are running behind them to see what's going on. However, when you speak to them, they saw nothing. So how can we change anything? That's the main problem. Another thing that I notice is we're very religious, right? And sometimes, yeah, the Caribbean, I'm religious, but I'm a Christian, not religious. And sometimes we mix up religion with like mental disability, because I've done a case on a young lady who's bipolar, on medication, and the family decided that she needs a spiritualist. Got taken out of the house. I don't know what she did to the young lady. Long and short, she died. I couldn't find a cause of death. But I could see that she's had some injuries over time to her body that she would not have caused herself, right? And nobody thought anything strange because she's a spiritualist, right? So it's a culture. There's some people who are mentally ill and we just ignore it or just don't realize. Again, I did a little boy who again had lots of tram marks. So somebody hit him over time, left in the care of a stepfather or something, and he died. He died from infection, but everything related back to his skin being infected, whatever. And the mommy, again, was not mentally well. So that's another issue. And again, we overlook things, we ignore things, we don't help people because that's not my business. You know, we're no longer interested in helping person in our community. So, I mean, it's a very sobering talk. So maybe I am missing the link between the trafficking and the murders, not dying directly from it, but becoming part of the system. So I mean, I have my workers and they will reason with me and they will say, no, in my community you have to do X, Y, or Z. You have no choice, right? You have these 16, 17-year-olds who are being killed because they're in gangs and they don't see a future for themselves, right? Some of us are not from that world, so we don't understand. And when I see like 5, 6 people being killed, like there was some shooting 2 months ago or last month, 3 people were killed, 3 people were killed the next day. It just went after one person after the next. There's no reasoning for it. Or you're a girlfriend of this person, so we're gonna kill you. And you guys don't hear half of these stories on the TV, which is probably good. It's protective, but it's our reality, right? And the police is trying, the church is trying, but everything starts in the home and in the community until we start being nosy and start, correcting young people when they do something wrong on the road or something like that. It's not gonna change, right? But I really think we need to start engaging the JCF. I don't know if you've ever invited the higher ranks of the criminal, the investigating officers, because I think this sociology part, the psychology part of it, I think might make a difference, because the brutality part, trying to talk to people is just not working. I went home to do a case last week, and I admire my colleague who was a police. Everybody knew him, and the way how he spoke, how he can get information, you know, he uses people's egos to get things out of them. He said, oh, I like that car, where you got it from, and they start bragging and they start saying things. Not very smart, but, you know, you get into people's heads, and you have to work smart, not just hard. So I really think we need to engage the JCF especially to make a difference. But as I say, I don't know anyone really directly dying from human trafficking. Drugs is something different. And again, I might be missing it, or they just don't usually die. Maybe Sissoko might know, the persons who do forensic medicine. To address the organ, what do you call it?
Harvesting.
We don't like that word, but I guess if it's illegal, it's harvesting. If it's something legal, it's donation. I know somebody asked my office for a statement to refute or confirm. No, we have not seen any decedents missing organs. I don't know what happened behind the scenes. I know there were videos circulating on social media, and if you look at it properly, you can see the person had an autopsy before or something like that. But My colleagues and I have not seen that as yet. I don't know if it's being reported in Jamaica, but I've never seen it. And that's my short little blurb.
Good evening, everyone. I am assigned to the Counter-Terrorism and Organized Crime Investigations branch. I'm directly assigned to the Anti-Trafficking in Persons and Intellectual Property Vice Squad. Both units, the names pretty long, and so I ensured I went as slowly as I saw fit so you could grasp where I'm from. I've been working on this unit for over 10 years. The unit was formed in 2005. Then we weren't Counterterrorism and Organized Crime Investigations branch. We were just Organized Crime Investigations Division. But at the time when the unit was formed, we were in awe, we were in denial. We were saying, human trafficking, this is not in Jamaica. This is not Jamaica we are talking about. The US is trying to be oppressive. This is not happening. And Dr. Gailey mentioned being blind to slavery. Even as law enforcement officers, we were at the time blind to slavery. But looking back, I remember whilst I was growing up in the country, I remembered listening to Ms. Gluden's program, and I heard on numerous occasions persons calling in, wanting a little boy or a little girl to come from the country to spend time with them, to send them to school, sometimes just for company. And it dawned on me that, because at the time I didn't have laptop and tablet and so on to be on, was listening to Ms. Gluden. But it dawned on me that this is what possibly was happening from way back then. And it is alarming that this could have been happening in plain sight, hidden in plain sight. And so at my unit, for short we say ATPIP Vice Squad. At my unit, we are dedicated to fighting to the best of our abilities. Sometimes it eats into our own personal lives, but we are dedicated to fighting to the best of our abilities this scourge. Our unit forms a part of the Ministry of Justice's, the task force at the Ministry of Justice called NATFATIP. We sit on that task force. We coordinate anti-trafficking activities island-wide for information of police headquarters and Ministry of Justice. We answer U.S. State Department queries for the TIP report. Over the years, we have launched varying efforts. In 2014 to 2015, we launched ID Fix. It was an offensive aimed at identifying the major players in the massage and sex trade. 2016, we launched Operation Uplift, and this is ongoing. We have seen out of Operation Uplift significant arrests, convictions, displacement of 3 major prostitution rings. And when we say convictions and so on, we speak also of offenses akin to human trafficking, such as living on the earnings of prostitution and so on. We look out for these kinds of things. We have had 4 convictions, 3 cases, 4 convictions. 1 case had two accused persons, and they were all convicted. The sentences ranged from like 16 years for rape, which was a charge that was imposed on one of the offenders, trafficking in persons, facilitating human trafficking, and 2 of the offenders were charged or caused to pay restitution to the victims. I must speak to the definition of trafficking in persons in order for me to speak directly to the topic. I need to ensure that we understand what human trafficking is, although I'm sure that Ms. Salmon, no doubt, in my absence, would have made that clear. Human trafficking, the activity we speak of in human trafficking: recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring, or receipt of persons. The means used: using threats, force, coercion, abduction, fraud, deception, abuse of power or a position of vulnerability, giving or receiving of payments or benefits to achieve the consent of a person having control over another person. And all this is for the purpose of exploitation. Exploitation comes in the form of sexual exploitation, domestic servitude, labor exploitation, and, but not limited to, organ harvesting. In most cases, in this practice, murder is committed. When an organ is removed, or two, usually they just dispose of what is left. Usually murder is committed. So we need to look at this. Is there a human trafficking, murder, human trafficking, murder, human trafficking, murder? Is there a connection? But in terms of the murder of youths in Jamaica, are we seeing the connection here in Jamaica? Are we looking at human trafficking on one hand, murders on one hand? Is there a connection? Let us explore. In recent times, as mentioned before, the fake news that was going around, it was of much concern to my unit. The emergence of videos and text messages alleging trafficking in persons breaches in Jamaica were in circulation on social media, WhatsApp, Facebook, etc. These messages allege that varying acts of trafficking in persons other than those we knew of were currently being perpetrated in Jamaica, and it was a serious cause for concern because no one was talking with us. These allegations were not taken lightly, and without access to their origin, the origin of the text messages, without anyone coming forward, and without information regarding these allegations, investigations were launched into the veracity of these claims. Investigations conducted revealed a lack of evidence to support or confirm these allegations. During the course of these investigations, the government pathologists were engaged, who reported no abnormalities with regards to suggestions of organ harvesting. So with regards to that aspect, in Jamaica, we cannot say that that was true or that murders in that regard happened here. I looked at the murders of youths ages 14 to 25 since 2006 to 2016, and also January of this year to July this year. I noted that I had a PowerPoint presentation, but I'm just going to give you an overview of the figures. In 2006, we had 334 youths of the age I mentioned murdered. In 2009, we had the most murders of 400 youths, 14 to 25. And since the start of 2017, we have had 148 youths, 14 to 25, murdered. These figures, for me, are alarming, and it is great cause for concern. I also saw where, as Dr. Gale had mentioned, and my statistics come from the JCF, the Statistics and Information Management Unit. And as Dr. Gale had mentioned before, that males The youths, the males, they are being targeted. They are at risk. The statistics I have here support what Dr. Gale had said, that the males are being killed. The females are being killed as well, but our males are at risk. I also have statistics to show that whilst they are being killed, they are also perpetrators of similar crimes. In 2017, youths arrested for Category 1 crime: murder, 154, shooting, 136, rape, 57, aggravated assault, 71, robbery, 134, break-ins, 129, larceny, 35. So far, 716 youths have been arrested for Category 1 crimes. This is a bit of an improvement coming from a high figure in 2013 of 1,792 youths arrested for Category 1 crimes. It therefore means that we have to look at this in a holistic way. The family certainly is a factor that we have to explore and which cannot be at all, intervention in that cannot be underestimated. It cannot be understated. So I support the suggestions of us looking at parenting and at the family. And I would want to also state that at this time, we have not seen where the murders are linked to human trafficking in Jamaica. However, both murders of the youths and human trafficking, in my mind, and the data suggests, are serious, very serious issues that we must tackle. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Detective Sergeant Kamisha Gordon. Now we know it's clear there isn't a nexus between the murder of youths and human trafficking as far as we know and as far as we have available evidence, right? But as our pathology suggested, it's something that maybe we can start looking out for. But at the end of the day, we all have a role to play. There's a need for collective action, as Ms. Salmon emphasized. There is a need for greater accountability, as Dr. Gale emphasized, and to a focus or revisiting or return to family and supporting families, and also supporting households of headed by unsupported mothers. A distinction was made, of course, between households headed by women and households where there are only women and they're the only breadwinners. We also heard from Dr. Niblett a number of factors that should be taken into consideration when considering explanations of why youths in Jamaica are murdered. Certainly it's not restricted to human trafficking, but there are a plethora of factors that needs to be considered, something that, again, Dr. Dunn emphasized, but also summarized. And I'm very pleased with Dr. Dunn's presentation, especially because from her presentation and Detective Gordon's presentation, we got a sense of what the government is doing in seeking to address this issue. So thank you so very much, discussants, keynote speaker, Ms. Salmon. Right now, we'll open the floor for 5 questions.
Is that possibly in Jamaica? Is it possible that you can have coercion of all kinds? Because you could even use a university and use psychological studies and declare people like Bedwood to be insane, therefore incompetent, therefore unable to work, therefore unable to eat. Is that some of the ways in which in our own society, in our own silent way, this kind of torture and murder of women takes place?
Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's it kind of links in a little bit with the question there, but it's to really to Dr. Dunn about the, I suppose the focus of the challenges really, and whether those challenges are being inputted by the funding bodies, whether it's the USA aid, European aid, USAID, whether those kind of funding organisations are kind of steering the kind of agenda, rather than, really Jamaicans, defining what they believe to be the solution, prioritising what's right. Because, I mean, what the situation in the UN is vast, and I think the lady said Jamaica's a small country. It can't tackle everything the United Nations wants to tackle.
I'm curious about the organ harvesting, for example. Can a non-medical, for example, extract organs? And if so, what are the implications for other people being involved? Because if do they know where a kidney would have been placed, for example, or where would have been the heart, for them to, it brings into question some of it.
Okay, in my training in Canada, they actually had organ donation, and that happened in a hospital, and obviously you need to know your anatomy to take out the particular organ. You need to keep the vessels, visible so you can actually suture them back in the other person. So I don't know anything about organ harvesting, but I will assume they need to know something about medicine, right? And you have to store the organs at a cold temperature. They can only survive for so many hours outside of the body. So it cannot be a layman, I'm assuming, doing that.
Let me assist a bit. Be minded that just the same way we network, the same way the criminals network, they are not all, what should I say, gangsters. There are medical doctors involved. There are so many kinds of intellects involved in the crime. For it to be successful, they have to do this. They have to network. So don't think in your mind that it's a little on the street side who's going to cut you and remove it. They have the connections, and that's how they make this thing happen. All right, so they know exactly what to do.
Yeah. The harvesting, we spoke about kidneys, for example, but there are various organs. There is also the situation of persons who cannot have children, and babies are at a premium. So persons can be trafficked to force you to have a child and use that child, right? You pay for it. It's a service, right? Thankfully, we're not aware of any cases here, but we don't know. I'm just using the opportunity to respond to my colleague's question about challenges, right? Now, we're fortunate in that we have support. It's never enough. United Nations Development Program, for example, supported a lot of the research which was done, but there's also collaboration with International Organization for Migration and others. So in the UN system, you would have different UN agencies specializing in different areas. For UN Women would be in terms of dealing with gender equality and issues affecting women. UNICEF would deal with children. So they're tackling it from different perspectives. And I should have mentioned also UN-AIDS. Now, if you're trafficked for sexual exploitation, you run a risk of getting HIV. We don't have a cure, but it means that you can be abused as well, and that's a whole other area. So UN-AIDS would be part of the whole program to tackle human trafficking, right? United Nations Population Fund would do a different perspective in terms of building awareness about reproductive health and so on, but also sensitizing the medical fraternity to say you should be looking out for these signs, which is why it is so important to educate doctors and nurses and so on, as well as your immigration. So someone might come in for something, and unless you're trained to understand what is really happening and connect the dots in terms of activity, means, and purpose, and you have a mandatory reporting system on that kind of thing, you're going to have cases slipping through the cracks. So I'm hopeful and positive that with the support UNDP and others have given in setting up this database, which is quite comprehensive and allows a lot more agencies to share information. So instead of looking at this problem in silos, as we have been doing to some extent, there can be broader sharing. And I must commend the JCF and the Office of the Director of Public Prosecution, because they were among the most consistent in terms of information sharing. So think how much richer we would be and how much more we would understand the scope and dimensions of human trafficking if we had a joined up government approach to it, which NATFATIP is proposing, and also if more stakeholders, I want the faith-based organizations to build that awareness, anyone who is on the front line in the community and so on. Last point, on the kids. We torture our children. If you want to see some horrible statistics, go to the Office of the Children's Advocate and you'll be horrified. Look at the trends, and they include data on human trafficking of children or child trafficking.
And it seems to me clear from what Dr. Neblett indicated, that a case that should have seen in respect of the abuse of that particular child and the markings or the possibility of abuse based on the markings that would be found. That's something that's very much popular in Jamaica. Beating of children, corporal punishment. So you'll see that in a way, if you look at in terms of torture, not maybe seen like as torture, but it is in terms of cruelty to child in that way. Women as well, you know, and the torture can be done in so many different ways. In respect of women, gender-based violence, you're seeing a lot of that.
I keep seeing children or young adults who might have been tortured, and it, again, is linked to a mental disability or a developmental delay. So I had a young guy who was, again, bipolar, and he was witnessed to jump into the harbor, and he drowned. But I saw marks on his hand and feet. And I'm like, what are these? He said, oh, his family kept him tied down because, you know, he didn't take his meds. And it was like so nonchalant. Like, is anybody going to be charged? Had another young guy. He was 21, but he looked like, I don't know, 10. And he was kept in this house that you couldn't even move around. And he got trapped in a door, right? He couldn't free himself. But again, it's like neglect, because he doesn't function like a 21-year-old. You know, how he was kept in the place was horrible. And his family said, oh, he gets stuck in the door all the time. Like, again, no bother. Like, it's a mentality, it's a culture. We don't understand mental illness. We can't cope. I don't know. It's a serious problem.
But I'm hopeful, you know, because I'm looking at Aldrin and I'm seeing social policy, a lot of the work that you have done on social policy, Heather Ricketts and so on. We need to understand that things are not perfect. And as part of the research agenda, the action agenda, the policy agenda, we need to ensure that we are compliant with international commitments. So I want to again commend SALISES on the work that you have been doing and encourage all the students here. There's a lot of work down there to be done. Gender students, wave your fingers. Right? The gender dimensions of human trafficking is something that we also look at, because there are differential risks for both males and females across different backgrounds and disabilities and so on. So please, everyone needs to get on board.
Thanks, guys. said this morning I woke up and I looked in the mirror and every part of my body was in place. Many people died and never saw this day. So another day I live, I appreciate. No matter what I ask to, I am mighty, because tomorrow I can fall down on my face. So in everything, Lord, I give you praise, and that puts a smile on my face. Lord, I thank you for sunshine, thank you for rain, thank you for joy, thank you for pain. It's a beautiful day. It's a beautiful day, yeah. Don't fuss and fight, let us unite. We got one life, so let's make it right. It's a beautiful day, yeah. Oh. You know why? You say, hey, though I walk through the valley of the shadows of death, I will fear no evil, won't be dismayed. When I see the clock ticking away and things are not in place, everything in life happens for a reason. Disappointment comes with a lesson. It's so easy to get wiser, got to work harder. In the end, it will get better. Lord, I thank you for sunshine, thank you for rain, thank you for joy, thank you for pain. It's a beautiful day. You know it's a beautiful day? Yeah. It's a beautiful day, yeah. Don't fuss and fight, let us unite. We got one life. Say it's a beautiful day, yeah. It's a beautiful day. Everybody got life in here? If you got life, then give God praise. You may not have much, but you're living day by day. You can have faith and no one to work. Get up off that seat and put that brain to work. Hey. Come on, say it's a beautiful day. What's so good? Come on. Say it's a beautiful day. See that now, see that now. Say it's a beautiful day.
I mean, despite the inclement weather, it was indeed a beautiful day. Yes, Miss Salman is agreeing. It is a beautiful day. So I just want to really thank the keynote speakers and the discussants for the excellent work that they're doing in their field to, in a sense, impact the situation in a positive way. I like to laud Dr. Dunn for her evidence-based research. We know that if Ministry of National Security is listening to anybody, it's Dr. Dunn with the TIP law and moves to improve Jamaica's ranking on the U.S. Department's world ranking on, or to improve our tier.